The last tendrils of the paved road had dissolved into a pitted gravel track miles ago, swallowed by the encroaching forest. My sedan, usually so assertive on city asphalt, now whined in protest, its tires spitting loose stones. The GPS, a device I trusted more than most living beings, had given up the ghost an hour back, its screen a blank, accusatory stare. I didn't blame it. Even satellites likely found this place an anomaly, a forgotten blot on the modern map. I was user VD, and this was my grand, ill-advised fresh start. The ancestral estate. The solicitor, a perpetually perspiring man named Mr. Finch, had called it a property of considerable historical significance. He'd carefully omitted dilapidated beyond belief and haunted by the ghosts of bad decisions. My inheritance. A sprawling, decaying monument to a lineage I barely knew, stood somewhere at the end of this winding tunnel of ancient oaks and weeping willows. My motivation was simple: escape. Not from anything dramatic, no scandalous headlines or personal tragedies, just the slow, creeping suffocation of an ordinary life that had somehow gone off-kilter. A vague sense of dissatisfaction, a quiet hum of unease that had become a roar. I'd always prided myself on my pragmatism, my grounded nature. Ghosts and ghouls were for late-night cable, not for a person who balanced their checkbook and believed in empirical evidence. Yet here I was, chasing a phantom connection to roots I never cared to acknowledge, convinced this remote wilderness held the key to recalibrating my existence. The tree line finally broke, revealing not a manicured lawn, but a wild expanse of waist-high weeds and skeletal rose bushes clawing at the sky. And then, the house. It wasn't merely old, it was ancient, a hulking mass of darkened stone and timber that seemed to sag under its own weight. Gables jutted like broken teeth, windows stared blankly, many with panes shattered or boarded over. A crumbling stone wall, barely discernible beneath a thick shroud of ivy, marked what I presumed was the property line. Far off to the left, almost swallowed by a particularly dense copse of gnarled pines, I caught a glimpse of something even stranger. A skeletal Ferris wheel, its rusted spokes reaching skyward like the bones of some long-dead mechanical beast. A closed amusement park the solicitor had mentioned in passing, a folly built by an eccentric ancestor. It looked more like a monument to forgotten screams. A wave of something cold, not quite dread, but a profound unease, washed over me. It felt less like I was arriving at a new home and more like I was intruding on a tomb. The air itself was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint metallic tang I couldn't quite place. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, a vacuum that pressed in on my ears. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the distant rhythmic creak of the Ferris wheel carried on a breeze that wasn't there a moment ago. My skepticism, usually a sturdy shield, felt thin, permeable. Stepping out, the gravel crunched under my boots. The air was surprisingly still, despite the motion I'd just heard. The house loomed, a silent observer. It was larger than I'd anticipated, a sprawling labyrinth of wings and turrets. The front door, a massive slab of oak studded with iron, looked impregnable. I fumbled in my pocket for the heavy, ornate key mister. Finch had pressed into my hand, its cold metal a shock against my skin. The lark groaned in protest, a drawn-out, guttural sound that seemed to echo through the entire structure. With a final, resonant click, the door swung inward. I stepped over the threshold, my boots sinking slightly into a thick carpet of dust. My flashlight beam cut a path through the gloom, revealing a grand, if utterly ruined, foyer. No answer, of course. I moved deeper, my skepticism battling a growing sense of vulnerability. This was just an old house. A very, very old house. The sounds it made were merely the settling of ancient timbers, the wind finding its way through broken panes. I told myself this with a conviction I didn't entirely feel. In what must have been the main drawing room, a vast space with a collapsed ceiling section and a monumental, soot-blackened fireplace, I shone my light across a long, dust-shrouded table. On it, amidst the debris, lay a single object, a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no larger than my palm. It looked like a child's toy, perhaps, or a decorative curio. It was not overtly sinister, but it stood out, clean and unnaturally pristine amidst the surrounding filth. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against its smooth, cool surface. It felt like polished bone. As I picked it up, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the floorboards beneath my feet. Not a structural groan, but something softer, more like a sigh. And then, from somewhere deep within the house, a faint, high-pitched giggle, so fleeting I almost dismissed it as a trick of the dusty air. I froze, the wooden bird suddenly heavy in my hand. My breath hitched. It was nothing, I told myself, just the wind, or the house settling, or my own overactive imagination. This place was getting to me. I was tired, disoriented. I clutched the bird tighter, its polished surface smooth and unsettling against my palm. A fresh start, I'd called it. The sedan finally shuddered to a halt, its engine ticking mournfully as if relieved of a great burden. Dust motes danced in the last shafts of sunlight, filtering through the dense canopy, illuminating the skeletal branches of forgotten trees. Before me, the house loomed, a silhouette against the bruised sky, its gables sharp as broken teeth. It was larger than I'd imagined, a sprawling monument to decay, nestled in an overgrown wilderness that seemed to actively resist any claim to civilization. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old pennies, mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness, pressed in. My boots crunched on fallen leaves and brittle twigs as I approached the massive oak door, its paint long since peeled away to reveal splintered, weathered wood. The brass knocker, tarnished black, felt cold and heavy under my palm. I didn't bother using it. This was my house now. Inside, the air was stagnant and cold, carrying the musty perfume of generations of neglect. Dust motes, thicker than anything outside, shimmered in the weak light that seeped through grimy windows. Just old craftsmanship, I told myself, a relic of a different era. I spent the first hour simply walking, pushing open creaking doors, peering into vast, empty rooms. Each space seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The furniture, where it remained, was draped in white sheets, resembling a graveyard of forgotten specters. In one of the smaller studies, a heavy oak desk stood untouched, a single, leather-bound ledger lying open on its surface. The pages were yellowed, brittle. The script, a tight, elegant hand, was difficult to decipher in the dim light. It wasn't a financial record nor a diary. It contained strange notations, precise timings and sketches of celestial bodies alongside crude, almost childlike drawings of figures arranged in circles. Underneath, a single, recurring symbol, a jagged, incomplete spiral. My brow furrowed. Practices. The estate agent had vaguely mentioned unusual devotions. This wasn't the kind of devotion I understood. I traced the spiral with a fingertip, a faint tremor running through me. The ink felt dry and ancient beneath my touch. Later, as I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, a soft, almost imperceptible thump sounded from somewhere above. My head snapped up. The house was settling, I reasoned, old wood groaning under its own weight. I continued, my senses now heightened, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of ivy against the windows, a potential intrusion. I stumbled upon a door that was not merely closed but sealed. Heavy wooden planks had been nailed across it, their heads rusted deep into the frame. A faint, sweet odor, like decaying lilies, emanated from behind it. Curiosity, a potent and dangerous force, seized me. I tugged at one of the planks, splinters digging into my palm, but it held firm. This wasn't just a room. It was a secret, deliberately locked away. The air felt heavier around the sealed door, and a low hum, almost a vibration, seemed to resonate in the floorboards beneath my feet. It was probably my imagination, an echo of the car engine, or simply the wind, I told myself, trying to rationalize the growing unease. I backed away, a knot tightening in my stomach. The house felt less like an inheritance and more like a vast, silent watcher. The estate grounds were far more expansive than I'd realized, stretching beyond the immediate vicinity of the house into a tangled wilderness. The metallic scent I'd noticed earlier intensified here, mingling with the earthy dampness. After a grueling 20 minutes of pushing through overgrown paths, I broke free into an unexpected clearing. My breath hitched. Before me lay a closed amusement park. Rusting rides clawed at the sky like skeletal giants. A Ferris wheel, its gondolas missing or twisted into grotesque shapes, stood sentinel. It was unsettling. This monument to joy turned to ruin, deep in the woods. Why would an ancestral estate have a defunct amusement park on its grounds? I walked towards the carousel, its center platform strangely intact. There, set into the very heart of the circular floor, was a mosaic. It was faded, obscured by moss and dirt, but I could make out the distinct, familiar shape of the jagged, incomplete spiral from the ledger. It wasn't just a symbol in a book. It was carved into the very land, a permanent fixture. My mind raced, trying to connect the disparate threads. The unsettling ledger, the sealed door, the strange hum, and now this, a decaying carnival bearing the same cryptic mark. This wasn't just an old house with a few quirks. This was a place where something had been done. I was alone, yes, but the feeling of being watched, of being assessed, was growing too strong to dismiss as mere nerves. My fresh start felt less like an opportunity and more like a trap. The sedan's engine died with a final, wheezing sigh, leaving only the distant, mournful soughing of wind through skeletal branches. I stepped out, the gravel crunching underfoot like brittle bones, and the heavy air of the forgotten woods pressed in. The house, a hulking shadow against the bruised twilight, seemed to sag under the weight of untold years. Its windows, dark and vacant, watched me with an unnerving stillness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old copper left out in the rain, mixed with the sickly sweetness of forgotten potpourri. Dust motes danced in the sparse light, filtering through grimy panes, caught in the beam of my headlamp. Each floorboard groaned under my weight, protesting my intrusion. I tried to dismiss it as the natural creak of an old structure settling, but the sounds felt deliberate, almost watchful. My initial sweep of the ground floor revealed a cavernous space choked with shrouded furniture, a mausoleum of forgotten domesticity. I focused on clearing a small area in what I presumed was the living room, tossing the musty sheets aside to reveal a cracked leather armchair and a low, dusty table. I told myself it was just a draft, an old house full of them. Later, as I attempted to light a fire in the hearth, a futile effort given the damp wood, I heard a distinct thud from the floor above. It sounded like something heavy dropping onto bare boards, followed by a soft, dragging scrape. My hands froze, the unlit kindling slipping from my grasp. My breath hitched. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't the house settling. I strained my ears, waiting, but the house offered only its usual symphony of creaks and groans, now imbued with a menacing undertone. "Hello," I called out, my voice thin and reedy. I considered grabbing my flashlight and investigating, but a primal instinct screamed at me to stay put, to not venture deeper into the unknown. I rationalized it, probably a rodent or a loose branch hitting the roof. Old houses made strange noises. I was just tired, my nerves frayed by the journey and the isolation. The next morning brought a false sense of normalcy. I spent the day trying to organize, to impose order on the chaos, and in doing so, stumbled upon an old leather-bound journal tucked away in a desk drawer. Its pages were brittle and yellowed, filled with looping, spidery script. Most of it was mundane, a chronicle of daily life generations ago. It depicted the estate, but also, surprisingly, an adjacent property labeled, in faded ink, the closed amusement park. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I had seen no sign of such a place on the modern maps I'd consulted. The journal entries grew more disjointed, filled with frantic warnings about the hunger beneath the painted smiles and the unseen audience. A strange, compelling urge began to fester within me, a morbid curiosity that outweighed my growing unease. I had to see it. I had to understand what my ancestor had written about. The path to the closed amusement park was overgrown, barely visible, a tunnel of grasping thorns and skeletal trees. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like rotting candy floss. When I finally broke through the dense foliage, the sight stole my breath. Rusting metal structures loomed like skeletal giants against the overcast sky. A Ferris wheel, its gondolas swaying gently in a non-existent breeze, stood petrified, a giant, sightless eye staring out over the decaying grounds. A carousel, its painted horses chipped and peeling, was frozen mid-gallop, their vacant glass eyes reflecting the dim light. The entire place was a monument to arrested joy, a nightmare tableau of forgotten laughter. As I walked, my boots scuffing on cracked asphalt, I heard it again. It wasn't English, or any language I recognized, but the sound was undeniably a voice, low and guttural, carrying a cadence of ancient malice. My blood felt like ice. Then, a painted horse on the carousel, the one with the cracked, smiling face, slowly, almost imperceptibly, tilted its head. Its glass eye, previously fixed on the horizon, now seemed to gaze directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. The horse was still. Stress. But then, a low, rumbling vibration started beneath my feet. It wasn't a distant truck or an earthquake. It felt internal, like the very ground was purring. And from the mouth of the carousel horse, a sound like dry, rattling laughter echoed through the desolate park, joined by a chorus of faint, childlike giggles that seemed to rise from the crumbling asphalt itself. My vision blurred at the edges, the rusted metal of the ride seeming to twist and stretch in the periphery. I scrambled back, stumbling over unseen debris, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my chest. This wasn't a draft. This wasn't a tired mind playing tricks. The closed amusement park was alive, in some horrifying, unnatural way, and it was watching me, its unseen audience stirring. I ran, leaving the silent, smiling faces behind, a desperate, animal flight from a reality that was rapidly unraveling. The rumbling intensified, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated up through the soles of my boots, rattling my teeth. It wasn't the distant growl of machinery. This was a living pulse, a slow, deliberate beat beneath the earth, and the laughter, it wasn't human. It was dry, brittle, like 1,000 insect wings scraping against parchment, and it echoed from the painted mouth of the carousel horse, joined now by a chorus of faint, choked whispers. My breath hitched. This wasn't a trick of the wind, nor was it my imagination. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and metallic, like old pennies left out in the rain. I stumbled back, my eyes darting across the desolate expanse of the closed amusement park. Rusting swings hung motionless, their chains groaning softly in the phantom breeze. A Ferris wheel, skeletal against the bruised sky, looked like a giant, broken clock. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the clatter laughter, making the hair on my arms stand on end. They weren't words I could understand, just a low, sibilant hiss, a collective sigh of something ancient and hungry. My skepticism, usually a sturdy shield, felt flimsy, riddled with holes. This wasn't a structural issue with the old estate, nor was it some local prank. This was here, now, in this forgotten place, and it was reaching for me. The ground beneath my feet continued its rhythmic tremor, pulling me deeper into the park, towards the source of the sound. The carousel horse, its once vibrant paint faded to a sickly yellow, seemed to tilt its head, its glass eye glinting with a malevolent intelligence. I moved, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, my steps crunching on loose gravel. A faint, sweet smell, like overripe fruit mixed with something acrid, grew stronger. It clung to the air, making my stomach churn. The rumbling led me past the teacup ride, its chipped cups filled with stagnant rainwater, and towards a cluster of overgrown foliage at the very edge of the park. Buried beneath a tangle of thorny vines and ancient, gnarled trees, I saw it. A small, dilapidated structure, barely visible. It looked like an old maintenance shed, or perhaps a concession stand that had been abandoned even before the rest of the park. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, to forget everything I had seen. But the insistent pull, that strange, internal vibration, urged me forward. My hand trembled as I pushed the door wider. The hinges shrieked, a sound like a tortured animal, and the metallic, sweet smell intensified, burning the back of my throat. Inside, the air was thick and still, heavy with dust, and the pervasive, sickening scent. A single, grimy window, high on one wall, cast a weak, watery light onto a makeshift altar. My breath caught. It wasn't an altar in any traditional sense, but a rough-hewn wooden table, scarred and stained, covered with an array of disturbing objects. There were crudely carved effigies of what looked like distorted human figures, their faces contorted in silent screams. Dried flowers, black with age, lay scattered amongst them. But what truly stole the air from my lungs was the book. It lay open in the center of the table, its leather cover cracked and peeling, pages yellowed and brittle. The script within was not English, nor any language I recognized. As my eyes scanned the page, the symbols seemed to writhe, to pulse with a faint inner light. As if alive, the ink on the page began to shift, to rearrange itself. Above it all, a single, recurring symbol, like a stylized, three-pronged claw, pulsed with an unnerving crimson glow. It was the same symbol I'd seen carved into the old stone well back at the estate. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. This wasn't just a dilapidated park or a creepy old house. This was a place of sacrifice. The estate, this park, my family, they were all intertwined in something ancient and monstrous. The recurring sacrifices, the pact. It was all laid bare before me, not in words I could read, but in images that burned themselves into my memory. My skepticism, once a fortress, crumbled into dust. The logical explanations, the rationalizations, evaporated like mist. This was real. The entity beneath the estate, the thing that stirred, that twisted reality, was not some vague ancestral legend. It was a hungry, patient horror, and my family had been feeding it for generations. And I, user VD, had just walked into its maw. The ground beneath the table began to tremble violently, the vibrations shaking the very foundations of the shed. A low, wet gurgle rose from somewhere directly below, followed by a sound like 1,000 tiny teeth gnawing on bone. The symbols on the book flared brighter now, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to draw all light into itself. I was no longer an observer. I was part of the ritual. I was the next offering. And the closed amusement park, with its rusted rides and echoing laughter, was merely the antechamber to something far, far worse. The ink bled. It didn't just shift. It thickened, seeped into the very paper, turning the delicate vellum into something pulpy and grotesque. The crude images solidified. Stick figures with hollow eyes, hands raised in supplication, a monstrous, shadowy void. And then the child, small and indistinct, being guided by a larger, equally shadowy hand towards that gaping maw. My fingers, stained with the phantom residue of the ancient ink, trembled as I slammed the book shut. The air, usually stale, now carried a faint, cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit left to rot. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The entity wasn't just beneath the property, it was here, its tendrils already coiling around the very fabric of my reality. I had to get out. That was the only thought that mattered, a desperate mantra repeating in my head. I didn't know what I'd seen or what it meant for certain, but the message was clear. This house, my inheritance, was a tomb. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, anything within reach, and stumbled towards the grand front doors. The doorknob, usually cool, felt strangely warm beneath my palm, almost alive. I wrenched it open and practically ran down the steps, across the overgrown lawn, towards the winding gravel path that led to the main road. I floored it, the tires kicking up a spray of loose stones as I sped away from the looming silhouette of the estate. The trees along the driveway, usually just a blur of green and brown, seemed to twist and contort in my peripheral vision, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Freedom, I told myself, just a few more minutes and I'd be free. Then I saw it. The main road, the only road in or out, was impassable. A massive oak, ancient and gnarled, lay sprawled across the asphalt, its roots torn from the earth, a gaping wound in the forest floor. It looked freshly fallen, but there was no sign of a storm, no recent heavy winds. It was too precise, too convenient. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt mere feet from the impenetrable barrier. My mind reeled. This wasn't nature, this was something else. I tried my phone, no signal. I tried again, walking a few yards down the road, holding it aloft like a desperate offering. Nothing. Back in the car, I fumbled for the outdated satellite phone I'd brought as a precaution, something I usually marked myself for. Dead. completely dead. The battery light flickered, then died, as if a switch had been flipped, cutting off my last tether to the outside world. I was trapped. There was nothing for it but to return. The drive back felt longer, the air thicker, heavier. The house, when I finally pulled into the circular driveway, seemed to have grown, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the encroaching night. As I stepped back inside, a profound sense of disorientation washed over me. The grand hall, which I'd left just minutes ago, felt subtly different. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me with a newfound intensity, their painted eyes following my every move. I tried to go back to the study, to retrieve the book, to confront whatever truth lay within its pages. But the hallway, familiar just hours before, seemed to stretch, to twist. A door I swore was the kitchen now led to a small, dusty antechamber I didn't recognize, filled with forgotten, moth-eaten tapestries depicting scenes of strange, ritualistic dances under a bruised moon. I backed out slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I walked faster, my steps echoing unnervingly. I passed a window, and for a terrifying moment, instead of the familiar, overgrown grounds, I saw something else entirely. A garish, sun-bleached carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, stood silhouetted against a murky sky. Beyond it, a Ferris wheel, rusted and skeletal, loomed. The air, even through the glass, seemed to carry the faint, sickly sweet scent of stale popcorn and something metallic, like old blood on damp concrete. It was a closed amusement park, impassably close, impassably there. My heart seized. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be. I clutched my head, trying to anchor myself to find something real. I pushed open another door, hoping for the study, but found myself in a child's nursery. It was small, circular, and bathed in an unnatural, soft blue light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. A wooden rocking horse stood in the center, its painted eyes chipped and lifeless. On a small, antique chest of drawers sat a single, worn rag doll, its button eyes staring blankly, and beneath it, tucked into a small, carved box, was a locket. My fingers fumbled with the clasp. It opened to reveal a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a child, no older than 5, with wide, somber eyes. Beneath the image, etched into the tarnished silver, was a single, ancient name, Lysandra. And I was standing in the very room where it had begun, or perhaps where it was meant to begin again. The house pulsed around me, a living, breathing thing, its walls closing in, the air thick with the entity's hunger. I was trapped, my mind unraveling, and the next sacrifice felt terrifyingly close. The ink didn't just bleed, it pulsed. What had been static, albeit disturbing, images on the vellum now writhed with an unsettling vitality. The crude stick figures, once merely representations, seemed to contort, their hollow eyes deepening into abyssal pits that mirrored my own widening dread. The monstrous, shadowy void at their center didn't just loom. It inhaled, a silent, profound suction that pulled at the very light in the room. And the child, small and indistinct, stretched, its form elongating, twisting into something impassably frail and grotesque, its tiny hands reaching, no longer in supplication, but in a desperate, silent grasp. I dropped the parchment. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. This wasn't a trick of the light, nor was it my imagination. This was real. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of stagnant water and ozone, like a storm brewing inside the very walls. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, a resonance that went beyond sound, sinking into my bones. Then a creak, not from the old house settling, but from the study door slowly swinging inward. I hadn't touched it. I backed away, my hand sweeping across the heavy oak desk, knocking over a stack of forgotten journals. No answer, just the growing pressure, the feeling of being watched, hunted. From the hallway, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone began to emanate, growing louder, closer. It wasn't just in the hall. It was inside the house, perhaps inside the walls, or even inside my head. Suddenly, the hum reached a piercing crescendo, a sound that tore through my skull. The world around me twisted. The sturdy oak of the study walls blurred, stretched, then dissolved into a sickening swirl of muted colors. My stomach lurched, a violent nausea rising, and I stumbled, falling through what felt like thin air, a dizzying, disorienting freefall. I landed hard on something gritty and uneven, the impact jarring my teeth. My head spun, vision swimming, but the immediate sharp pain brought me back to a semblance of reality. I pushed myself up, my hands scraping against rusted metal and crumbling concrete. The air here was different, damp metallic, thick with the scent of decay and stale popcorn. Before me stood a Ferris wheel, skeletal against a bruised sky, its gondolas swaying gently in a phantom breeze. Rust bled down its struts like ancient dried blood. Behind it, a carousel, its painted horses chipped and eyeless, leaned precariously, half buried in encroaching weeds. I was in a closed amusement park. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, mournful creak of unseen rides and the whisper of dead leaves across cracked asphalt. This wasn't a memory, not a dream. I had been in the study, and now I was here. The entity, whatever it was no longer content with subtle manipulations. It was playing with me, dragging me into its twisted playground. "Hello!" My voice was swallowed by the vast, empty space. A mocking echo seemed to ripple back from the rusted metal structures. I started walking, my steps crunching on debris. Each dilapidated attraction seemed to watch me. A sudden gust of wind caught a tattered banner, ripping it free with a sound like tearing flesh. It spiraled down, landing at my feet, revealing faded letters that spelled out, "Welcome to the..." The rest was gone. A distant whirring sound started up, low and mechanical. From the direction of a ride I couldn't quite discern through the gloom. It grew louder, a grinding, strained noise, like gears struggling against decades of rust. Then a sharp crack. A section of the track from a roller coaster high above me groaned, shifted, and with a horrifying shriek of tortured metal, began to collapse. I dove, scrambling blindly as massive chunks of steel and concrete rained down where I had just been standing. The ground vibrated with the impact. I lay panting, my heart racing, the acrid taste of fear and dust in my mouth. It was trying to kill me, not just scare me, but physically eliminate me. As I slowly pushed myself up, my gaze fell upon a weathered sign nailed to a leaning kiosk. Its paint was almost entirely flaked away, but a few faded, barely legible words remained, etched deep into the wood beneath. The ancients, eternal hunger, the price, a life, a lineage to sustain. My ancestors, the rituals, the pact. It wasn't just about power or secrets. It was about feeding, sustaining something so vast, so ancient that it transcended all human comprehension. A cosmic horror, yes, but not one that merely observed, one that consumed. It demanded a constant tithe, a continuous sacrifice from the very bloodline that had first disturbed its slumber. And now it was my turn to pay the price. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The fading light in the amusement park seemed to dim further, plunging the world into a deeper, suffocating gloom. The entity wasn't just hunting me. It was conditioning me, breaking me down, softening me for its ultimate purpose. The truth, once glimpsed, had burned away the last vestiges of my doubt, leaving behind a raw, searing certainty. It wasn't just old blood and buried secrets. It was hunger. A gaping, ancient maw beneath the foundations of my inheritance, a cosmic horror that didn't merely observe, but consumed. It demanded a constant tithe, a perpetual feast, and my ancestors had been its willing purveyors. I understood now, with a clarity that threatened to shatter my mind, that the estate itself was a kind of elaborate trap, a charnel house cloaked in decaying grandeur. The understanding didn't bring peace, but a terrible, desperate resolve. If it fed, then perhaps it could be starved. If it consumed, then perhaps its mouth could be sealed. I didn't know how, not truly, but a primal instinct, a whisper born of terror and defiance, pulled me towards the estate's forgotten edges, past the overgrown gardens and crumbling out buildings. There was a place, a festering wound on the land, where the veil felt thinnest, where the entity's influence seemed to coalesce. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, and something acrid, metallic, like old blood mixed with ozone. The trees, denser here, seemed to lean in, their skeletal branches clawing at the bruised sky. Then, through a sudden break in the foliage, I saw it. A closed amusement park. It wasn't just abandoned, it was wrong. Faded primary colors clung to rusting metal, a grotesque parody of joy. A Ferris wheel, half collapsed, loomed like a broken eye socket against the twilight. A carousel, its painted horses stripped bare of their cheerful veneer, looked like a circle of flayed beasts, fixed in a silent, agonizing gallop. The silence here wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was a pressure, a vacuum that sucked the breath from my lungs and the warmth from my skin. Each step I took on the cracked asphalt felt like trespassing on a grave. My eyes scanned the decaying structures. A tilt-a-whirl, its cars listing drunkenly. A funhouse, its mirrors shattered into 1,000 marking shards. The air vibrated with a low hum, a frequency felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. It was a resonance, a thrumming beat that mirrored the frantic pulse in my temples. This wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was the heart of the estate's power, a place where collective human joy and fear had been distilled, concentrated, and then left to rot for something else to feast upon. This was the entity's larder, its altar, its manifestation point. This was it. I felt it. The entity wasn't just under the estate. It was here. It had woven itself into the very fabric of this place, twisting its purpose, turning merriment into a grotesque mockery. The peeling paint of a cartoon mascot on a nearby concession stand seemed to leer, its cheerful grin stretched into a rictus of silent agony. The hum intensified, becoming a low, guttural growl that resonated inside my skull. The carousel horses, I swore, shifted. Their glass eyes seemed to follow me, reflecting the dim, dying light with a malevolent sheen. My breath hitched. Was I truly seeing this, or was the entity already picking apart the threads of my sanity? It spoke of hunger, of ancient pacts, of a lineage bound by blood and fear. It promised power, knowledge, an end to suffering, all for a simple, final offering, my offering. For a moment, a terrible, tempting moment, I almost surrendered. To simply let go, to become another forgotten morsel. They weren't powerful, they were enslaved. Their pact hadn't brought them dominion but damnation. I would not be another link in that chain. My hand, trembling, reached into my satchel, fumbling for the arcane objects I'd unearthed from the dusty archives. A small, tarnished silver amulet, etched with symbols I didn't fully understand but felt instinctively were wards, and a crude, iron-bound journal. Its pages filled with my great-grandmother's frantic, half-mad scrawlings of a counter-ritual. It spoke of severance, of a temporary binding, of a sacrifice not of blood, but of will. I clutched the amulet, its cold metal a grounding point against the psychic assault. The entity's presence solidified, manifesting as a crushing weight, a distortion of reality. The air shimmered, the colors around me bled, and the very ground seemed to buckle and heave. The carousel horses began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, their silent gallop turning into a dizzying blur, their empty eye sockets fixed on me. A high-pitched, discordant music, like a broken music box playing a funeral dirge, began to emanate from the speakers hidden within the structure. This was the confrontation. The entity wasn't a beast with claws and teeth. It was a force that warped perception, that preyed on the mind, that sought to consume my very essence. It was trying to break me, to make me willingly step onto its altar. I forced my eyes open, ignoring the phantom images of skeletal figures dancing on the stage, ignoring the carousel's maddening spin. I focused on the journal, on the frantic, looping script. The counter-ritual was not about power, but about rejection. About severing the connection, not destroying the entity. For how could one destroy something so vast and ancient? But perhaps it could be cut off, its feeder lines severed, its influence temporarily banished from this place. The ritual required a profound act of will, a casting off of fear, a deliberate rejection of the entity's twisted allure. It demanded a sacrifice, not of my life, but of the very hope of a normal life, of a sane future. I had to acknowledge the horror, accept its existence, and then, with every fiber of my being, refuse its claim. The words were not in any language I knew, but they resonated with an ancient power. The amulet grew hot in my hand, burning against my palm. The entity roared, a soundless scream that threatened to tear my mind apart. The carousel spun faster, the music crescendoing into a deafening shriek. The ground beneath me trembled violently. My vision blurred. The amusement park twisted into a nightmare landscape, the rusting metal groaning like tortured flesh, the faded colors dripping like fresh blood. But I pushed back, my voice growing stronger, my resolve hardening into an iron shield. I would not be consumed. I would not be a tithe. I would not be broken. The ritual demanded a final act, a severing. I had to physically cut something, a symbolic break. My eyes fell on the amulet, still searing my palm. This connection, this lineage, this cursed inheritance. I raised my hand, the silver glinting in the distorted light, and with a desperate surge of will, I jammed the amulet's sharp edge into the soft flesh of my forearm, drawing blood. A searing pain, a sharp, clean cut. The air, though still heavy, no longer hummed with malevolence. I staggered, my arm throbbing, the blood welling from the fresh wound. My head swam, my sanity teetering on the edge of a precipice. Had I succeeded? Or had I merely bought myself a moment, a reprieve? The entity was not gone. I knew that. Something so vast, so ancient, could not be destroyed by a mere mortal. But I had sealed it for now. I had rejected its claim and the cost. My mind felt like a shattered mirror, reflecting a fragmented, terrifying reality. The silence was deafening, but within it, I could still hear the faint, echoing whisper of a hunger that would one day return. The truth had not merely burned away my doubt. It had cauterized a part of my mind, leaving a raw, screaming cavity where skepticism once resided. And I, user VD, had become its chosen morsel, its final, bitter course. My escape from the estate was less a flight and more a stumble through a landscape that had begun to ripple at the edges. The woods, once a comforting canopy of green, now pulsed with a sickly, bruised light, the trees themselves seeming to writhe, their branches like grasping skeletal fingers. My vehicle, miraculously still functional, became a metallic shell against the encroaching distortion, its engine a desperate growl against the rising chorus of unseen whispers. I drove, not knowing where I was going, only that the estate was pulling at me, a barbed hook in my gut, dragging me back. Then, a flicker in the periphery. A sign, half-rotted, listing precariously. Wonderland Funhouse. The name, once a promise of delight, now hung like a shroud over something profoundly wrong. My hands, slick with cold sweat, gripped the wheel tighter as the car veered, almost without my conscious command, down a crumbling asphalt path. I found myself at the entrance to a closed amusement park. Rusting gates, twisted into grotesque smiles, stood ajar. Beyond them, a landscape of faded primary colors and skeletal rides stretched under a sky the color of old bruises. The air here was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something cloying and metallic, like stagnant water mixed with forgotten dreams. A carousel, its painted horses stripped bare of their vibrant hues, leaned to one side, its poles snapping with a soft, mournful creak in the non-existent wind. A Ferris wheel, a colossal skeleton against the bruised sky, seemed to spin slowly, silently, each empty gondola a vacant eye staring into nothing. My foot lifted from the accelerator. This place. It hummed with a different kind of decay, not just of neglect, but of something having been used, then discarded. A profound, unsettling emptiness clung to the broken ticket booths and the graffiti-scarred walls of what must have been a funhouse. The peeling paint on a clown's face, halfway between a grin and a grimace, seemed to follow me. I stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel and splintered wood. The ground felt soft, spongy in places, as if the very earth beneath the park was breathing. My gaze drifted to the main attraction, a towering roller coaster, its tracks snaking into a dizzying helix, then plunging into the gaping maw of a tunnel shaped like a monstrous, fanged mouth. It was about sustenance. A lineage of custodians, not guardians. They weren't fighting the entity, they were feeding it. The estate was a larder, and I, the last of the line, was destined to be the grand feast. But why here? Why the amusement park? The distorted reality that had begun at the estate now fully bloomed here. The carousel horses, lifeless moments ago, now seemed to twitch their heads, their glass eyes reflecting an impassable internal light. The Ferris wheel gondolas swayed with an invisible passenger, a faint, high-pitched giggle echoing from their empty spaces. My own breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't just a place. It was a memory, twisted and replayed. Then the true horror of the event began. The roller coaster. Its rusted chains began to clank, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. A single car, black as pitch, materialized on the tracks, rising with agonizing slowness towards the peak. It was empty, or was it? As it reached the apex, silhouetted against the bruised sky, I saw it. Not a person, but a presence. A shimmering distortion in the air, a ripple in the fabric of light, coalescing into something vast and formless within the car. It was the hunger itself, given a temporary, terrifying shape. A low, guttural vibration filled the air, not a sound I heard with my ears, but felt in my bones, in the very marrow. It was the entity, the ancient maw, calling to me. This park, this mockery of joy, was its chosen altar, its final trap. This wasn't just a place of sacrifice, it was a mirror. My ancestors hadn't just fed the entity, they had offered up their emotions, their joy, their fear, their life in a grand, grotesque performance, a macabre ritual staged for the entity's consumption. And I, the last, was meant to complete the cycle, to become the ultimate expression of despair in its final, consuming act. The roller coaster car plunged, down, down, into the fanged mouth of the tunnel, carrying the rippling distortion with it. The sound it made was not of metal on metal, but a deafening shriek that tore through the very air, twisting the remaining structures of the park. The clown's face on the funhouse now gaped, its painted smile stretching impassably wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The carousel horses reared, their empty eye sockets burning with a terrible, ancient malice. I stood there, frozen, the world dissolving around me. The ground beneath my feet was no longer solid, but a shifting mosaic of rusted metal and decaying wood, all of it vibrating with the entity's presence. I could feel it, a vast, ancient consciousness pressing in, seeking to envelop me, to break me down into pure, raw sensation for its consumption. The horror wasn't just out there. It was in here, in my mind, echoing the screams of generations. There was no escape, not truly. The choice wasn't about living or dying, but about how I would be consumed. I could fight, prolonging the inevitable, becoming another screaming echo in the entity's endless hunger, or I could give in, offer a different kind of sacrifice. The entity fed on the unraveling, on the fear, the despair, the brokenness. My ancestors had tried to control it, to appease it, to direct its hunger, but it was insatiable. This was its playground, its hunting ground. If I resisted, if I tried to leave, it would follow. It would spread, so I chose. Not for victory, but for containment. For a moment of respite, for a sliver of hope that perhaps, one day, someone else wouldn't have to face this. I walked towards the fanged tunnel, towards the place where the entity had last descended. My steps were heavy, each one an act of profound surrender. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, trying to force me to break, to scream, to give it the raw, unadulterated fear it craved. But I wouldn't. I would offer it something else, a quiet despair, a resignation that was more terrifying than any scream. I felt the entity's vastness, its ancient, consuming presence wrap around me, not with a sudden attack, but with a slow, deliberate embrace. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was a dissolving. My senses, my memories, my very sense of self began to fray, unspooling like old thread. I was being absorbed, becoming part of the hunger, a single, conscious note in its endless, cosmic dirge. The closed amusement park remained. Its rusting gates still stood ajar, its broken rides still marked the sky. Deeper, more profound, a perfect, echoing emptiness. And somewhere within its twisted depths, I, user VD, was still there, a ghost in the machine, a silent, screaming witness to the entity's perpetual, unfathomable hunger. The immediate conflict was over, but the horror had just begun its true, endless ride.